We continue our study of More's Utopia, the first book. So as we saw that More was asked by Raphael was asked by Peter and then by Thomas More to join some king's service, and he refused. Then he says that it is extremely rare to find states which are ruled by good laws, and that is an opportunity for others to ask him about the states that he has visited. And in course of this discourse, he will refer to a number of nations, of course all fictitious, created by More, but they will provide some kind of a foil to the British culture and British laws or practices. So he says, many times have I chanced upon such proud, lewd, overthwart and wayward judgments, and once in England. So as he refers to England, then More asks him, I pray you, sir, have you been in our country? Now this is a dangerous territory in which the writer is entering or venturing, because here through Raphael, More provides a critique of English laws, and the critique is thoroughly analytical, also descriptive, and therefore is a formidable criticism of the present scenario in England. But before the dialogue begins, or this discourse begins, the character of Cardinal Morton is introduced. Morton was a real character. He was the Lord Chancellor of England. More stayed at his house for about 2 years and was benefited by his influence. So More had great respect for Morton, and in this book he represents this great man. Now Morton was successful to sail through all the dangers of state politics and somehow avoided any kind of harsh punishment. But that was also extremely rare in the life of a courtier, because a courtier who advised the king would at any point or at some point would definitely offend the king. Therefore it was a very risky job, but Morton was somehow successful and sailed through it. So here he is described as John Morton, Archbishop and Cardinal of Canterbury, and at that time also Lord Chancellor of England, a man Master Peter, for Master More knoweth already that I will say, nor more honourable for his authority than for his prudence and virtue. So Raphael is saying this. Raphael is referring to Cardinal Morton, and says that he is a great man with whom I had a conversation earlier. So this whole thing is a narration. He had great delight many times with rough speech to his suitors, to prove but without harm what prompt wit and what bold spirit were in every man. So you see, Morton is being praised for his prudence. Now prudence was one of the 4 cardinal virtues in ancient culture, and prudence was extremely required to sail through these dangerous times. But More also praises through Raphael the wit, humor, bold speech, all these features which are the hallmarks of an intellectual, one who is a free thinker. And the same person, as apt and meet to have an administration in the will public, he did lovingly embrace. In his speech he was fine, eloquent and pithy. In the law he had profound knowledge. In wit he was incomparable, and in memory wonderful excellent. These qualities which in him were by mature or by nature singular, he by learning and use had made perfect. So we have some kind of a very brief sketch of what are the virtues which are required in a courtier. Of course, for the Renaissance, the best book on this was Castiglione's The Book of the Courtier, and that was itself a part of a whole genre of educational books for princes. So, at the outset, there were books written for princes or conduct manuals for princes. Then, by extension, books started to appear on the ideal, behavior and qualities of a courtier. And finally, the concept of the courtier was a European concept popularized by Castiglione, the Book of the Courtier, Baldassare Castiglione. In the 16th century itself, this book was translated in English by Sir Thomas Hoby. But by the time Hoby writes, we see that Hoby presents the idea of a gentleman rather than the idea of a European courtier. On this subject, I have a paper on Hoby's translation and how he transformed the idea of the courtier into that of the gentleman. It is available in academia. So here, this was a very important theme for Renaissance writers. This was a theme of education. So, first people thought about education of princes, then they thought about education of gentlemen, because in those times everybody was not educated, mass education was not there. But then with the activities of the humanists, more and more schools began to be opened, and earlier there were only religious schools or monastic schools, but then the kings began to open secular schools. Henry VIII himself opened a number of secular schools. Therefore, the idea that education should reach a greater number of people, that idea was gradually, changing the earlier idea that education should be reserved only for the monks or, for the princes. So this is very much a humanist theme, because the humanists were concerned with education. The king put much trust in his counsel. The will public also in a manner leaned unto him when I was there. For even in the chief of his youth, he was taken from school into the court, and there passed all his time in much trouble and business, being continually tumbled and tossed in the waves of diverse misfortunes and adversities. So any literature you read in the Renaissance, there are many poems by Donne, for example, where you find that this idea that the life of a courtier is extremely uncertain, and the job at court was highly risky and dangerous. That idea is expressed in a lot of Renaissance literature. Then it chanced on a certain day when I sat at his table, there was also a certain layman cunning in the laws of your realms. There was a lawyer, a British lawyer, who I cannot tell whereof taking occasion, began diligently and earnestly to praise that straight and rigorous justice which at the time was there executed upon felons, who, as he said, were for the most part 20 hanged together upon one gallows. So England was notorious in those times for hanging of thieves, and thieves were hanged simultaneously, 20 of them at one go in the gallows. And for this kind of hanging, large wooden structures were created, where a great number of people could be hanged together. One such structure was notorious, named Tyburn. It was not a tree, but since it was like a raised pole from which there was another horizontal pole, and from those horizontal poles all the people were hanged. So it was called a tree, Tyburn tree. It was notorious and many people were hanged there. So this lawyer was praising this custom of England, justice to the felons. Now why thieves were so ruthlessly punished in England, that is a question. I suppose that in a country where money is religion, there somebody's private property or money being taken away is the highest offence. Is the capital offence, and for that England had passed those laws of hanging of thieves. And the lawyer was praising this, and then Raphael opposed him and said, marvel nothing hereat, for this punishment of thieves passeth the limits of justice and is also very hurtful to the will public. So he criticized this law as unjust and hurtful to the country. For it is too extreme and cruel a punishment for theft, and yet not sufficient to refrain and withhold men from theft. For simple theft is not so great an offence that it ought to be punished with death, and so on. So here we have this whole discussion on the question of whether thieves should be given capital punishment or whether thieves should be hanged. Now this question is raised in the context of England, but of course it is also a question for every country, for any country, and it raises the question of capital punishment, whether capital punishment is at all justified for any offence, whether men have the right to kill other men legally. So this debate has still not been resolved. So in many countries there are still capital punishment, in our country also. So killing legally is still justified in many countries, though not in all countries. Then Raphael goes on to say the different reasons why there are so many thieves in England in the first place. Because people become poorer and poorer for various administrative mismanagement and wrong policies. So Raphael points out these policies. So he begins by criticizing the upper castes. So we commonly think that the thieves belong to the lower caste, so therefore they are to be blamed. But Raphael says that there is a great number of gentlemen which cannot be content to live idle themselves, like drones, of that which others have laboured for their tenants. England was full of idle gentlemen, because gentlemen were not supposed to work, as feudal lords were not supposed to work. Work was considered below their dignity. Thus, these men had landed aristocracy, and also gentlemen, that is those who acquired the title of gentlemen, they also acquired land. The bourgeois or middle class people who by trade and commerce became rich, they were buying titles of the gentleman. We know Shakespeare himself bought the title of a gentleman. So once you buy the title from the state, of course, the king sold those titles, and then you get a symbol, an ensign, which you can display in your flag. So if you go to Stratford upon Avon today, you see the flag of Shakespeare's family or Shakespeare's flag, the ensign flowing from the top of his house. So the idea was that the middle class was mimicking the aristocracy. The aristocracy had traditional shields, ensigns, embossed on their shields. All those practices came from medieval institution of chivalry, But the middle class wanted to be like the aristocracy and have that kind of prestige. In France also, the kings sold the title of nobility, and thus in France there were two kinds of noblemen: noblemen by blood, that is by birth, and noblesse de robe, or noblemen by dress, that is those who bought the title and wore a kind of dress to suggest that they have become noblemen. Now, this large number of people who were idle, who didn't work, they were parasites. They were living off the labor of the working class. They only raised the rents of the land from time to time. For this only point of frugality do they use men, else through their lavish and prodigal spending, able to bring themselves to very beggary. So these men are also very extravagant, and sometimes they turn into beggars themselves because of their extravagance. I say these gentlemen do not only live in idleness themselves, but also carry about with them at their tails a great flock or train of idle and loitering serving men. So it was a question of status of having serving men. So that comes from the feudal tradition. That is, a nobleman or a lord will always have a number of serving men who would follow him around. Shakespeare gives the best example of such of this issue. He deals with this issue in King Lear, where King Lear entered into an agreement with his two daughters when he divided his kingdom among them, that he will have 100 knights. And then these 100 knights, they followed him around, and then the daughters started bargaining with him. They did not want him to keep those knights. So that was basically a clash between the values of the aristocracy, old aristocracy, and the values of the kind of middle class values, which in that play is represented by Regan, Cornwall, Goneril, and so on. So the idle serving men, they had no other, job that benefited the society, no productive job. They just followed around, and they were status symbols. They never learned any craft whereby to get their livings. These men, as soon as their master is dead or besick themselves, be incontinent thrust out of doors. So when their master died or they became sick, then they were thrust out of doors. They were not paid their salaries anymore, and they turned into beggars. Then another source of beggary, rising number of beggars, was hired soldiers. So we have to understand this discourse in the context of 16th century England, where vagabondage was a problem. People who did not work and who moved from place to place asking for alms, or sometimes extorting alms by threat. And sometimes these people are also called sturdy beggars. So against these kind of vagabonds or beggars, specific law was brought out in England. Against these were called poor laws, against the poor people. So being poor was some kind of an offense in itself. Right. Again, I give this example from King Lear. There, Edgar, the younger son of Gloucester, he takes the guise of Bedlamite beggar. That is, Bedlam was the mental hospital, and a sturdy man, a strong young man, who would sometimes collect alms by appearing as a madman or by threatening others. So this kind of people, this kind of characters were there in plenty at that time. If these people were caught, then they would be hanged. That was the only punishment. So hired soldiers, forsooth, sir, as well you might say, quoth I, More says, that for war's sake you must cherish thieves, for surely you shall never lack thieves while you have them. No, not More, Raphael. Raphael is speaking to the lawyer. No, not thieves be not the most false and faint-hearted soldiers, nor soldiers be not the cowardliest thieves. So well these two crafts agree together. So here Raphael is talking about hired soldiers or mercenaries, who were by no means the idea of modern disciplined trained soldiers that we have. So these were mercenaries, and they were little different from thieves. So wherever they went, and when they were not busy in war, then they would steal, and people were afraid of them. But this fault, though it be much used among you, yet is it not peculiar to you only, that is not peculiar to England only, but common also almost to all nations. Yet France besides this is troubled and infected with a much sorer plague. France particularly used to hire Swiss mercenaries. The Swiss had become renowned in Europe as hired soldiers. That is, they did not know any other craft or job. They just joined any army, all over Europe, wherever possible, and would fight. So this tradition of the professionalism, of the Swiss soldier, we can see that even in a play as late as Bernard Shaw's Arms and the Man, where Bluntschli is shown as a professional soldier, unlike the Serbian Sergius. Okay. But yes, absolutely right. Because Swiss soldiers would fight for anybody. Even when these crusades were going on, in the late crusades, so some Swiss soldiers also joined the side of the Turks. And not only Swiss, other soldiers, Belgian soldiers, mercenary soldiers were also there. And the Turkish Sultan had, I am forgetting his nationality, probably Belgian, engineer who devised a very powerful cannon. And therefore Sultan Mahmud, he was victorious in his wars against the Europe. No, he was Hungarian, I remember it now. This Hungarian engineer joined the Turkish army and invented this cannon, which was so powerful that the Christian army of the Europeans were defeated. And this war was going on in the border of Hungary, because these East European countries, they were the frontier against the Turkish invasion. So most of the wars were going on in those regions. Alright, so Raphael is talking about mercenary soldiers, but Raphael is talking about soldiers in much earlier times, and therefore at that time these soldiers were not trained at all. Like Bluntschli is presented in a positive way as a professional soldier, or the Hungarian engineer was very competent and devised a cannon. But Raphael is talking about soldiers who were merely mercenaries, had no proper training or discipline, but they would, render their service against anybody who will pay them. So they had no character, and they were often blamed for stealing as well. Yes.
Sir, can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Sir, the one you were saying now, like they're paid for money, was Raphael talking about the Fenalians in Utopia, the soldiers who were quite, they were not soldiers, they were very barbaric race, and they used to be hired by the Utopians for fighting battles. Is it kind of the same?
It is, you see, it is an idea that professional soldiers are hired by certain states. So it is similar, but when Raphael is talking in the context of France, England, these countries, these mercenaries who are thieves, he is not talking about highly professional soldiers, but he is talking about poor men who did not know any craft and who did not have high morals, but just would fight for anybody for money. All right.
Okay, sir, got it.
Yes. So these are the sources, various sources from which in England the number of thieves came to a high number. So they all, when they were idle, they all joined the beggars. Truly, however, the case standeth, this methinketh is nothing available to the will public, for what sake, which you never have, but when you will yourselves, to keep and maintain an innumerable flock of that sort of men, that be so troublesome and noyous in peace, whereof you ought to have 1,000 times more regard than of war. So Raphael says it is useless to have such an army of soldiers of whom you are yourselves afraid, and you have to be very cautious about them, about keeping them. But yet this is not only the necessary cause of stealing, there is another which, as I suppose, is proper and peculiar to Englishmen. Now Raphael is broaching a topic, the topic of enclosures. It is historically a very significant. So enclosures was a practice introduced in England. In England there are private lands as well as lands which were considered to be common property. So even today if you go to England, you will find many places which are called commons, and these commons sometimes they are parks, sometimes they are just free spaces. So in earlier times these commons were meant for grazing sheep. So poor people would graze their sheep in the commons because they did not have any private land. Now the English people, the noblemen, they began the practice of enclosing the commons by putting up fences. So when these fences were put up, then the poor people could not take their sheep there anymore, and as a result the supply of wool was reduced, the price of wool became very high, the people became poorer and poorer, and the rich landlords, they tended to buy their sheep, buy all the sheep from the poor people. So this was a reason of poverty, and as a result of this poverty, the number of beggars and thieves also increased. Forsooth, my lord, quoth I, your sheep that were wont to be so meek and tame and so small eaters, now as I hear say, we become so great devourers and so wild that they eat up and swallow down the very men themselves. So Raphael ironically or sardonically says that the sheep are eating the men, because the landlords are enclosing the commons so that only their sheep can graze and the poor people cannot graze their sheep. So the poor people are dying out of poverty. They consume, destroy and devour whole fields, houses and cities. For look in what parts of the realm doth grow the finest and therefore dearest wool. They are noblemen, gentlemen, yea, and certain abbots, holy men no doubt, not contenting themselves with yearly revenues and profits that were wont to go to their forefathers and predecessors of their lands, nor being content that they live in rest and pleasure, nothing profiting, yea, much annoying the will public, leave no ground for tillage. So even agricultural land was enclosed in this fashion. Enclose all into pastures, they throw down houses, they plug down towns, and leave nothing standing but only the church to be made a sheep house. That is, the Christian, in Christian parlance, the Christians are sheep and the priest is the shepherd. So Hythlodaeus ironically says that poor men cannot graze their sheep anymore, only in the church there are the sheep. But the rich men, and among those men, apart from gentlemen, there are also the abbots. So you see, some abbots and monks had become very rich. So they also started enclosing land, even agricultural land. So poor peasants also were thrown out of their profession. Then there is a whole discussion how these men encroached upon the land by one means therefore or by other, either by hook or crook. They must needs depart away, poor, silly, wretched souls, men, women, husbands, wives, fatherless children, widows, woeful mothers with their young babes, and their whole household, small in substance and much in number, as husbandry requireth many hands. Away they trudge, I say, out of their known and accustomed houses, finding no place to rest in, and so on. So all these poor people with their families, with their paltry belongings, they were evicted because they did not find any more any job. They could not find land for pasture, or they could not find land for agriculture. So all these poor people were evicted, and that led to the swelling number of the beggars and thieves. And the price of wool rose so high that the poor people could not even buy wool for themselves. And though the number of sheep increased ever so fast, yet the price falleth not one mite, because there be so few sellers. The sheep were all concentrated in the hands of a few rich men. And sheep increase in number very fast. They reproduce very fast. But even then the price of the sheep did not fall. Because it became some kind of an oligopoly where a few people controlled all the sheep. So the price did not fall. But they almost all come into a few rich men's hands, whom no need forced to sell before the least, and they list not before they may sell as dear as they list. So they won't sell their sheep until they are very highly priced. Now the same cause bringeth in like dearth of the other kinds of cattle here, and that so much the more, because that after farms plucked down and husbandry decayed, there is no man that passeth for the breeding of young store. So this lack of sheep decayed the whole industry, whole practice of husbandry in the country, and as a result other kinds of cattle were also not available, because poor people cannot breed them anymore. Thus the unreasonable covetousness of a few has turned the thing to the utter undoing of your island, in the which thing the chief felicity of your realm did consist. Chief felicity, chief happiness of the country, that consisted mainly in this wool industry and raising of sheep. And this is true even today. If you go to England, you will see flocks of sheep sometimes blocking the railway track, and trains would be delayed because of the sheep. So that is still one of the important revenue earning industries in England. But Hythloday says that this has now become extremely damaged, decayed, and therefore the happiness of your country is gone. And the result of poverty is crime. So Raphael says that the other effects of this enclosure is the rising crime and rioting. To amend the matter, to this wretched beggary and miserable poverty is joined great wantonness, importunate superfluity, and excessive riot. And these rioting, this kind of superfluity, that is excessive consumption, rioting always refers to not only fighting but refers to going to the pleasure houses, brothels, or drinking in public drinking places. And in these places frequently quarrels or riots broke out. And this group of people, landless laborers, serving men who were idle or jobless serving men, such people, hired mercenaries who were jobless at the moment, they flocked to these places. For not only gentlemen servants but also handicraftsmen and almost the ploughmen of the country with all other sorts of people use much strange and proud newfangledness in their apparel and too much prodigal riot and sumptuous fare at their table. Now bawds, queens, whores, harlots, trumpets, brothel houses, stews and yet another stews, wine taverns, ale houses and tippling houses with so many naughty, lewd and unlawful games as dice, cards, tables, tennis, bowls, quoits, do not all these send the haunters of them straight a-stealing when their money is gone? So we see here a whole catalogue of the different kind of vices or evil practices which have been time and again criticized in religious writings. Gambling, dicing, card playing, all these practices, brothel houses, public drinking places and so on. So in these places people come and spend their money, and when they spend all their money then they become thieves. Suffer not these rich men to buy up all, to engross and forestall, and with their monopoly to keep the market alone as pleases them. So you see more comes straight to this important economic topic, the topic of monopoly, which was much discussed. We know in modern times, in modern economic theory, monopoly is considered an ill practice in trade and commerce, and therefore various laws have been enacted to curb monopolistic practice. However, in the 16th and 17th centuries, I think even in the 19th century, the kings granted the right to monopoly to different people. So the East India Company also got monopoly in salt, in cloth, and some commodities. So that practice continued from the 16th century to the 19th century. As long as kings and monarchs ruled England, they always wanted to make money by selling monopolies. And once somebody or some company got a monopoly on a commodity, then they made enormous profit by high pricing, and because they were without competitors, so they could demand very high prices, right? So this is an economic ill practice, evil practice, to which more draws our attention through the character Raphael Hythloday, and says that it is this practice of monopoly that also leads to the rising poverty and consequently stealing. So let not the rich men buy up everything. Let not so many be brought up in idleness. Let husbandry and tillage be restored. Let cloth working be renewed, that there may be honest labours for this idle sort to pass their time in profitability, which hitherto either poverty hath caused to be thieves, or else now be either vagabonds or idle serving men, and shortly will be thieves. Doubtless, unless you find a remedy for these enormities, you shall in vain advance yourselves of executing justice upon felons. So Raphael suggests that instead of hanging poor people, instead of hanging thieves, you go to the root of their poverty and try to eradicate the reasons, the causes of poverty, and then the lawyer attempted to respond to Raphael, and the lawyer is well versed in disputation, and he said that, I will respond to your speech by dividing and subdividing my lecture into so many parts, which was a practice of scholastic disputation that was common in the universities in the Middle Ages. But the humanists, they began to oppose this kind of useless disputation, and we see here a criticism of this practice, because when the lawyer suggested that he will dispute in this manner, then the Cardinal Morton stopped him. Indeed, sir, quoth he, you have said well, being but a stranger and one that might rather hear something of these matters than have any exact or perfect knowledge of the same, as I will incontinent by open proffer make manifest and plain. For first I will rehearse in order all that you have said, then I will declare wherein you be deceived through lack of knowledge in all our fashions, manners and customs. And last of all, I will answer your arguments and confute them every one. First, therefore, I will begin where I promised. 4 things you seem to me. So, this division into topics and subtopics, that suggested that it is going to be a long speech, and the cardinal stopped him. Hold your peace, quoth the cardinal, for it appeareth that you will make no short answer, which makes such a beginning. Okay. And then the cardinal tells Raphael, I would very gladly hear of you why you think theft not worthy to be punished with death, or what other punishments you can devise. So, the question of capital punishment, whether punishment by death, execution, whether that is appropriate or not, or whether there should be some other form of punishment, the cardinal prompts Raphael on that discussion. So Raphael says, surely my lord, I think it not right nor justice that the loss of money should cause the loss of man's life. For mine opinion is that all the goods in the world are not able to countervail man's life. But if they would thus say that the breaking of justice and the transgression of the laws is recompensed with this punishment, and not the loss of the money, then why may not this extreme and rigorous justice well be called plain injury? For so cruel governance, so strait rules, and unmerciful laws be not allowable, that if a small offence be committed, by and by the sword should be drawn. So Raphael criticizes the capital punishment and says that it is excessive for a small offence like theft. And then he goes on to say that killing anybody cannot be permitted, even by religion. For whereas by the permission of God, no man neither hath power to kill neither himself nor yet any other man. Then if a law made by the consent of men concerning slaughter of men ought to be of such strength, force and virtue, that they which contrary to the commandment of God have killed those whom this constitution of man commanded to be killed, be clean, quiet and exempt out of the bonds and danger of God's commandment, shall it not then by this reason follow that the power of God's commandment shall extend no farther than man's law does define and permit? So Raphael says that man does not have, any jurisdiction over another man's life, because the Bible says that we cannot kill another person, and if by law we make it legal to kill another man, then we are actually limiting the power of God. We are limiting the power of religion. Therefore, on this ground also it is unacceptable. To be short, Moses' law, though it were ungentle and sharp, as a law that was given to bondmen, and then very obstinate, stubborn and stiff-necked, yet it punished theft by the purse and not with death. So, the Old Testament is looked upon as the book of the law, and the New Testament preaches the gospel of love. So Mosaic law was replaced by Christ's gospel of love. And Raphael says that this law, which was very crude and rough, this was created for a people who were stubborn. That is, the Israelites who were the followers of Moses. But even in that law, theft was punished by the purse, that is, by some fine, and not by capital punishment or execution. So he says in conclusion that you have heard all the reasons, and I am persuaded that this punishment is unlawful. Furthermore, I think there is nobody that knoweth not how unreasonable, yet how pernicious a thing it is to the will public, that a thief and a homicide or murderer should suffer equal and like punishment. Now, he takes in hand the question of what kind of punishment should be given for stealing, which would be better a form of punishment on this. And then he goes on to talk about another nation, the Polylerites. So what do the Polylerites do? They that in this land be attainted and convict of felony make restitution of that which they stole to the right owner, and not as they do in other lands to the king, whom they think to have no more right to the thief's stolen thing than the thief himself had. But if the thing be lost or made away, then the value of it is paid of the goods of such offenders, which else remaineth all whole to their wives and children. So the Polylerites, they make the thief pay back the exact amount that he had stolen to the victim, to the right owner. And if he had stolen some commodity and he had used it up, then he would pay back an equivalent amount of money. But the king has no right over the thing stolen. Now that is where we see that England in Tudor times and in our country even today, more or less this practice is opposed to what Raphael suggests Polylerites do, because stolen commodities, they are first of all confiscated by the state when they are found. They that refuse labor or go slowly and slackly to their work be not only tied in chains but also pricked forward with stripes. So among the Polylerites, men are made to work hard, and there is no lack of work. There is no lack of food because everybody works. All and every one of them be apparelled in one color, and so on. The serving men of every several shire be distinct and known from other by their several and distinct badges. The serving men have uniforms which vary according to provinces. Thus, they cannot remain idle. People can easily identify them as serving men. This is the law and the order in this behalf, as I have shown you, wherein what humanity is used, how far it is from cruelty, and how commodious it is, you do plainly perceive. So basically, thieves, they first return their stolen commodity or equivalent money to the right owner, and then they are made to work. They are given uniforms, and idleness is not allowed. So this is the practice of the Polylerites, and to some extent we see that it is similar to that in Utopia, but here it is in the context of stealing that the question of the Polylerites and their practices come up.